Hi guys, hi YouTubers, hi fellas.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the E92 Plus Cybersecurity Sales 101 workshop. We'll be starting very shortly, just letting everybody join in and connect, and we'll begin in a minute. Thank you. And good morning to everybody joining the E92 Plus Cybersecurity Sales 101 workshop. We're just letting everybody log in now, and we'll be starting very shortly. Thank you. Okay, I think we've got most people joining us now. So yes, hello and welcome to the E92 Plus Cybersecurity Sales 101 workshop. So just do a few introductions. So obviously normally we used to do this in person. So a little bit of a change now. So my name is Neil Langridge. I'm the Marketing Director at E92 Plus, and I'll be delivering the workshop through this morning. So just a few notes in terms of how it's going to run. From a timing perspective, it normally runs about 60 minutes, sometimes runs a little bit over if we get a few more questions or we kind of go into a few more different areas. So, but we should be finished just after 10:30. I will be recording the session as well. So if you do have colleagues who would like to make it, or you have to drop off for any reason, then hopefully we should be able to share the session afterwards for you. I will also make reference to various other kind of news stories, assets, blog posts, other information, other stories and background examples of cyber attacks, for example. I do send an email around with links to all of those. So don't worry too much about trying to make sure that you can remember all those items. I will send that information around. In terms of questions, there is the chat and Q&A feature. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. Really is no problem. We can either wait to the end. As I said, I will send an email around afterwards if you had anything else from a follow-up perspective. Then do feel free to get in touch afterwards. But, you know, as we go through any other questions, please do ask. It is a 101. So, you know, from a level perspective, you know, it's very much entry level. So for obviously, we tend to have kind of a mixed audience for people who are kind of absolutely brand new to IT and cybersecurity, and some people who kind of know a little bit more. You know, so bearing in mind it is meant to be entry level and introductory course. You know, there are no silly questions, absolutely. So, you know, don't feel embarrassed about asking anything. You know, through the feature. So let's we'll get started. So in terms of the first thing I kind of want to cover, it's always really useful to be able to talk about something you know, that obviously we can all relate to in our personal lives as well. And from a cybersecurity perspective, the thing that we have most interaction with on a daily basis are passwords. You know, that's what we all use, all of those absolutely every day. You know, I think it's one of the areas where it's probably been the biggest challenge for cybersecurity for many people, as well, in terms of the sort of passwords that we may all have at home. That's probably a really good example. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ask a quick little poll. So first of all, I'm going to ask about passwords. So if you think of your personal accounts, so this could be your social media, your email, your banking, your shopping, the website that you bought a pair of trainers from 14 years ago, how many different passwords do you have? So, you know, they can be long, they can be short, they can be as complex as you like, but how many different ones you have? So essentially it's about reusing passwords. So how many unique ones? We'll just give people a second to be able to fill that in. So smashing, I think we've got kind of most people there. So that's really interesting. So in terms of the results, half of you have more than 10. So that's obviously going to be good because that was the maximum. Kind of a small number of you have 5 to 10. And I have to say quite a relatively high percentage there have only 2 to 4 passwords. So obviously there's a lot of reusing passwords there. There'll be a few takeaways that obviously we'll take from today. Hopefully there'll be lots of great learning generally. But one of the things I definitely want to kind of have in terms of you thinking about things is about use of your own password. So there's definitely some lessons there. So we'll come on to kind of, you know, what the meaning of all of that is. We don't have anybody who only has one password. In all the time that I've been running this, I've never had anybody who's only had one. I have actually delivered some cybersecurity training for both school children and their parents as well in my local school a few times. And we did have somebody who had one password for absolutely everything. And obviously it was somebody I knew. So I had to give her a little bit of a hard time, although I did give her a prize as well, because she deserved something for being honest, if nothing else, to only having one password. So thanks to everyone who kind of pulled in and submitted their results in that. So let's look at those passwords. In a recent breach, there was an example of nearly half the passwords that were exposed in that breach related to the company name or breach resource. The kind of classic example, 11% of them were identical, which were, of course, the word password. But it's how we all deal with that. We all know passwords are a challenge, and they're difficult to manage, and there's a lot of reluctance, even after things go wrong. So there was another recent data breach that a couple of universities did some research into and found that after that, only a third of people actually changed their password, and less than half actually made them any stronger. Most people either kept them the same or made them worse. And typically they found that up to 30 accounts were using that same password. If you're anything like me, you actually have kind of dozens or possibly over, hundreds of different accounts with passwords from every website that you've kind of potentially ever been on. But people don't necessarily, even in the event of a data breach, change their passwords after. The guidance on this has kind of changed quite a lot over the years. And it shows how difficult it is for all of us as cybersecurity professionals. We work in the industry, and even I think we've shown here that some of our practice around passwords isn't necessarily that great. And that shows if we're not doing it, how much of it is a challenge out there for your customers and, the huge variety of employees they have to be able to really be good on their password management. The guidance generally used to be changing your password on a regular basis. I think that's considered not so great because people then just don't bother doing it anyway because they don't remember it, or they make the passwords more memorable. Long and complex was always the guidance, but again, people don't necessarily remember them. The general advice from the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is the kind of public-friendly face of GCHQ and the kind of military spooks, is to have things like passphrases, so 3 random words that could go together that makes it complex but actually easier to remember. Generally, the best guidance is a password manager, but certainly the one thing we'll talk about that is about what are organizations vulnerabilities, and often the target for bad actors will be to go after their weakest point. The weakest point here is the website where that could get compromised. And ultimately, if you share your passwords across multiple accounts, it only takes one of them to be to be exposed to a data breach, and then all of them could get compromised. As soon as you have these big attacks, these big data breaches, all the content gets dumped on the internet. The first thing that a lot of bad actors will do is they will take that and then they will attack lots of other websites using those username and passwords. So just be testing them. So other people have had that repeatedly in the past. Zoom had a big issue kind of last year when they had a lot of accounts that were compromised. And it wasn't because Zoom, for example, had lost all that data. It's just that there were a number of large data breaches, and then people used that information to try and compromise their accounts. And because of this issue around password reuse, then a lot of people unfortunately got exposed. So I would definitely recommend looking at password managers. I'd definitely have a look at making sure, especially on your most important accounts, don't reuse your passwords. And then this is a great resource as well, Have I Been Pwned? So it's run by a independent security researcher called Troy Hunt. It's a fantastic resource. I'll send links around to you. Basically, what you can do for a personal individual, it's free to use. You can put your email address in there, and it can tell you what websites have basically been compromised that you have an account with and that your information has been lost. So that's really, really useful for you to understand where you might need to change your account. And if you register with them, then if that again happens in the future, then you automatically get notified. So that's really, really handy to have. So, if nothing else, that's a good personal takeaway for today. So if we come on to, in terms of what we want to cover today, we talk about it being a 101. So what's really useful is let's have a look at the threat landscape. So, why we're here today is to be able to have, kind of more in-depth conversations with our customers around cybersecurity and help them protect their business and obviously hopefully grow your business as well. But let's get a good understanding of where we are in terms of that threat landscape. There are a number of different sorts of bad actors out there. So if we look at those people that kind of potentially could be a threat out there, let's have a look at, examples of some of them. And, there is always a little bit of overlap in these, but broadly speaking, they can get broken down into a number of different types. Top left, obviously, let's start with the cyber criminals. And we know that that's obviously kind of a massive area. Ultimately, if there's money to be made, then we know that crime, unfortunately, is going to follow. And cybersecurity, or kind of cyber crime, is worth billions and billions of dollars. Every year, that number potentially does keep going up in terms of the various different estimates. Cyber criminals have increased massively in terms of the level of sophistication. You definitely still have people doing really basic things on a budget, trying their luck. But you do also have cybercrime gangs that are incredibly sophisticated. They have global networks. They have proper IT teams. They have coders. They have CISOs. They'll have their own cybersecurity defense experts, because they'll be worried about getting breached or attacked themselves, either by other cybercriminal gangs or obviously by the authorities that they're trying to stay hidden from. So the level of sophistication that cybercrime has is very huge. And again, the targets will vary. There's a huge range out there. So obviously, some people are going to be targeting only high value opportunities. It's going to be very specific who they're going for. They're going to be larger companies or individuals or organizations where there's a huge potential value. And sometimes it might take a little bit more of a spray and pray approach, that that it'll be mass, it'll be indiscriminate. And therefore that argument that, it's easy for a lot of people or organizations to have, like, well, I'm not necessarily, I'm not high profile, I'm not interesting, why would anybody target me? It's simply because they can. There's not always necessarily kind of logic. It's not always very specific in terms of those people that are going to get, unfortunately, hit by cybercrime gangs. They can literally be indiscriminate, going out there and attacking absolutely anybody if there's an opportunity. And we'll come on to some of those other tactics later, and that will explain a little bit more why. Onto the next one, you've kind of got, malicious individuals, and that can be kind of very deliberately malicious. Sometimes it can be a little bit unlucky. If you kind of take the archetypal 15-year-old in their kind of bedroom messing about, we know that can be a damage, because some of the most high-profile attacks of the last 10 years or so have been done by that. That was who compromised TalkTalk on one of their multiple breaches when they got hit and their website got compromised and personal information was taken. That was by a young kid in his bedroom. That wasn't necessarily trying to be kind of massively malicious or steal that data. There was an element of kind of showing off about it, being able to test the waters, the boundaries, see what people could do. But nonetheless, that obviously resulted in significant PR damage to TalkTalk. There was they didn't lose as much data actually as they initially thought, but from a PR perspective and a fines perspective and a customer customer trust perspective, that was a big hit on them. So again, that can be an example of where it's definitely a little bit indiscriminate. We've got hacktivists there. There's probably a good dotted line as well there to a terrorist. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Those people are not necessarily motivated by money, but they're definitely motivated by damage and PR and wrecking as much havoc as possible. So, hacktivists, for example, might be looking at more defacing website, owning accounts, taking them over, spreading their message, but nonetheless causing significant damage and problems for an organization. So again, really, really important for them to be able to stay secure. I think a lot of people are aware of the value of data and information. So while previously it might just be taking over, compromising someone's Twitter account to be able to change it to a political message, now they know that if there's confidential information there that could be embarrassing, that actually now they might be a little, organizations that are in the eye of some hacktivists might actually be a little bit more at risk, because they know the damage that could happen of leaking that information. So that's definitely moved on another level now as well. So again, if you have organizations that are a little bit more high profile or involved in some controversial areas, then I think that's definitely a potential risk there. When we look at state actors, so we're talking about nation states, countries there, But, the term kind of cyber warfare does definitely get bandied around a little bit. It's been used by the UK government. There's been a, talk of a significant investment in our capabilities there, in theoretically defense, but I think there's definitely been a message of it being used from an offensive perspective as well. We have seen that already happen. So one of the most kind of famous examples of a long, complex, and very fascinating breach was, and some malware was Stuxnet. Now that happened quite a while ago. That was 11 years ago now, where the nuclear energy system in Iran was taken out. There's not been a kind of firm commitment as to who actually did that. I think there's a general suspicion that it was probably America and Israel, but they have denied that, to be fair. But it's a really fascinating story. It's a great example of a long game that was played there. Lots of social engineering techniques using industrial control systems. Kind of multiple elements that make it a really fascinating story. There's actually a really good documentary by Alex Gibney, who's an Oscar-winning film director, that I'd recommend, called 0 Days. Again, I'll send the links to that. But it's a really good documentary, good watch that's not very technical, but it's quite entertaining and actually gives you some great insights into some of the tactics that are still very, very relevant today. But that was an example of, Iran posing a local threat and another country wanting to be able to significantly inhibit their capabilities. It does happen with countries attacking other organizations, though, as well. I think it's widely accepted that North Korea were behind the attack on Sony Pictures, the movie company, a few years ago, because they took a particular dislike to a film that Sony was going to make. They leaked the film, which kind of ruined the big release of it. They never got a cinematic release in the end. There was also a massive exposure of a lot of internal confidential documents, including the pay of a lot of their stars and some internal emails that were highly personal and critical. So that was definitely a nation state attacking another company. So that definitely happens as well. Obviously, from your customers may not think that obviously they could potentially be exposed. But one of the things that you then go on to is supply chain attacks. So, we've definitely seen examples of where organizations have been hit because they're specifically the target, but because they're in that supply chain. We're going to come on to that a little bit more, but that can definitely happen with nation states. I think there was a general consensus that when RSA, who are a cybersecurity company, got attacked a few years ago by a nation state, that they weren't attempting, actually, that the ultimate target wasn't RSA themselves. They were trying to compromise their multi-factor authentication to be able to get into a US defense company. So that's an example of, a state-owned company, but even, they weren't, ultimately there was collateral damage in the way there. And then the final one is companies. So, kind of company on company attack. Obviously, some countries have slightly reduced controls or restrictions. So, they're companies and organizations, they're kind of sometimes kind of behave in a way with fewer restrictions than they may do somewhere else. So obviously stealing IP, stealing confidential information and data and insight, or IP or patents or trademarks or designs, that definitely happens as well out there. So, definitely organizations with a high level of confidential IP are definitely, and other ones that could be at risk there. But ultimately, if you wanted to kind of just summarize it, where are the potential risks coming from? Absolutely everybody. So if we cover a little bit now about attack vectors, just to kind of make clear kind of where we are in terms of, kind of what the different types of attacks are. Definitely things like phishing attack, web attacks, and malware are kind of really, really high up there. We'll just cover a couple of examples of malware. We've got, when we talk about malware, we mean malicious software that's sitting on a device. Examples of that are Trojans, so obviously named after the Greek mythology, the Trojan horse that was sitting there. Software that looks absolutely legitimate and acceptable, but actually ends up being kind of obviously malicious. Ransomware, so we do talk about ransomware. So that's a form of malware. Effectively, what we mean is crypto ransomware, where that ransomware actually encrypts people's files, therefore effectively makes them kind of completely inaccessible by anybody who doesn't have the key. And then it's the key that people hold to ransom for money. Sorry, just cover them on there. APT, advanced persistent threats. So that's a prolonged attack, often sitting there undetected for a long period of time. just on the ransomware, actually, there's been probably a bit more of an evolution since that we talk about exploitation ransomware, where actually it kind of effectively has become twofold. That not only will the people's files be encrypted and then they'll charge a ransom for it, there'll actually be an additional risk on top that if that ransom isn't paid, they'll then release the files out into the public, which obviously then could be kind of potentially damaging from that perspective as well. So there's kind of two elements of that. Obviously, very, very, very aggressive in that nature. When we talk about phishing, I'm sure you've all had those emails, or messages that come through to say, from HMRC to say you've got a tax refund, from the lottery to say you've won, from COVID to say you've got to do a test or something. Obviously, a lot of those are obviously completely fake. Sometimes they're very sloppy and they're almost embarrassing, but obviously they still do work. And then sometimes they're incredibly sophisticated in terms of the phishing. What they're trying to do is get information from you, get you to click on a link to give them information, or to download malware from a compromised or malicious website, and then obviously control your device. When we talk about spear phishing or whaling, that's a lot more targeted. So the whaling is going for big targets. Spear phishing, very direct. It's going for specific people, and that kind of relates to business email compromise. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. A few more other bits and pieces, examples just to kind of cover here. So, for example, when we talk about things like DDoS, so distributed denial of service, that's when people attack websites or networks with the intention of being able to take them down. I mentioned 0 Day, the name of that film. So it's 0 Day. You often get that here in the press. 0 Day is a vulnerability that hasn't been discovered yet. So that's where, Windows might have a flaw that could get compromised, for example. But no Microsoft don't necessarily know it, but an organization has discovered it. Now, you do get a lot of bug bounty programs nowadays where organizations like Microsoft and Google and Apple and what have you will actually pay money to independent cybersecurity researchers to tell them about those potential vulnerabilities so they can release a patch, which is obviously, definitely a great thing. But unfortunately, sometimes obviously, that if people are not kind of ethically well inclined, then they may be able to view that they can get a better payment for it if they sell it, on the internet to some malicious actors. So, 0 days are, absolutely a gold mine for bad actors and cyber criminals out there. Sql Injection, another type of where people compromise websites, as is kind of cross-site scripting. And then bots are basically any application or device that's been kind of controlled. So, for example, it could be your laptop, it could be a CCTV camera, it could be an air conditioning system, it could be absolutely anything. Ultimately, it gets turned into a dumb device by malware and then used as part of a potential attack. And then just in terms of some of the kind of more kind of terms from a good, if you like, when we talk about things like SOCs, so a SOC is a security operations center. So that's the larger organizations where they have their controlling system. Patching, always making sure that we're applying the latest updates. So, when you do get an update, for example, on your phone or your laptop, it's not, don't worry so much about the features. If there's a security update, always apply the latest patch that you can as soon as possible. So it's not just about a kind of a cool new feature. It's about making sure that it's keeping your device as secure as possible. And red blue teams is where organizations basically have tests or simulations to be able to test their own defenses using their own internal teams and good guys against bad guys running as a simulation. So if we have a look in terms of where we are now. So there's a little bit of background from the threat landscape, but obviously we're here to be able to help protect our organizations that we work with, our customers and our prospects, but also potentially to grow our business as well. But what's the challenge? What's the conversation that we need to be having out there? Well, first of all, there's absolutely kind of good news as well. So obviously the last kind of year and a half has introduced a kind of a huge number of changes. And from a good perspective, a lot of organizations have realized that the value of IT, digitizing and, becoming kind of more tech-led in many ways, over 80% of organizations have absolutely accelerated that process. A big part of that has been definitely a move to the cloud. More organizations have taken that opportunity to move a lot quicker than they ever would have done before. Budgets kind of got released, and organizations needed that flexibility and agility, and those plans were brought forward. And with that, cybersecurity spending kind of goes up as well. The less good news is obviously cyber crime and cyber attacks are definitely on the increase as well. And those potential kind of risk areas have definitely changed and evolved as well. Many of you may well be working from home today, and a lot of you and your customers may well be using your own personal devices, whether that's on your phone to check your email, or whether that's on your own personal laptop, using a VPN or a remote desktop to connect to your work applications. And therefore, you're now, in terms of when we talk about the network perimeter, it's no longer, in the office, everyone on workstations, a few servers, and then a firewall protecting, that entire network. Your personal phone now is the perimeter. And therefore, that means, your home network, is part of that as well. And therefore, that kind of potential risk for organizations has fundamentally changed. In terms of, kind of what those threats have evolved, we definitely see ransomware as one of the biggest ones now, especially from a cyber insurance perspective, and those attacks have definitely evolved, and definitely become a lot more aggressive. And there's definitely an opportunity out there for us all from a commercial perspective. The Department for Culture, Media and Sport estimate that the cybersecurity market is worth over 8 billion. That number obviously, kind of does change, but it certainly keeps going up. Some example stats as well from their research that, nearly, over 2/3 of IT bosses said that they'd suffered a cyber attack in the last 12 months. I think that we can probably take that number with a pinch of salt, because I think it's probably higher from two perspectives. One, that nobody necessarily always wants to admit when they've been breached. So there's probably an element of not everybody wanting to admit it. The second one is people don't necessarily know. I mean, if the worst should happen to your house and you come home and you've been broken into, the likelihood is that, there'll be, a hole in the window and glass on the floor, and you'll be able to see that's happened. If there's a data breach at your organization, yes, potentially there could be ransomware. You could be asked, you could have systems down, you could have your website kind of attacked. On the other hand, somebody could have come in using, Trojans we talk about, kind of secret that nobody ever knows about. Malware's come in, is compromised your network, stolen data, and nobody ever even knows about it. So I think that number could almost certainly is likely to be higher. Again, 2/3 said that resulted in a financial loss. Again, the financial losses can be significant and they can be complicated. They can obviously be very, very direct in terms of things like ransomware, but there's also a cost of rebuild, increased cybersecurity spending. There's more training. There could be fines. There could be loss of kind of credibility or goodwill with customers if their data got breached and had to go public on it. So, the financial losses can be, there's a lot of hidden financial loss and cost in there in the event of a cyber attack, without a doubt. And yet, despite those elements, less than 1/3 of UK businesses had a senior, executive responsible for looking after this. And certainly because of the rate of change, it's really important for us to be able to be having those conversations with our customers, and making sure that there's real transparency there. So some research from another vendor highlighted that, more than 1 in 5 organizations actually didn't tell their resellers, their partners like you, about some of the activities that they were doing in terms of rolling out new applications or devices or part of their digital transformation. Understandably, the rate of change has been so quick. People don't necessarily have those opportunities. But the problem is if they're working with you, you're there as their trusted advisor to help protect them and provide that cybersecurity guidance. If you don't know what they're doing, then that's going to be a real challenge, and it's going to be hard for you to be able to protect them in the way that you absolutely need to. So there's a real challenge there, and we'll come on to some of the reasons why that might happen later. And staggeringly, a high percentage of organizations kind of admitted that they were probably a little bit complacent about things. So, kind of where are we? What does a modern, modern organization look like? Well, it could be this lady sitting in a coffee shop, Now we're all allowed back into coffee shops as well. She's on a laptop. That might not be the organization's laptop. She's accessing public Wi-Fi, and she could be accessing cloud applications. So, that is the new perimeter, and there's a huge kind of lack of control in the same way that it necessarily used to be the case. Generally the level of confidence out there with a lot of individuals is quite high. So we can see there a lot of people do use BYOD. Over half of people surveyed by IBM do use their own devices, and they feel confident about keeping PII, personal identifiable information, secure. I'm just going to do another little question here out for you, just a second poll. So launch, there we go. So since lockdown had started last year, or since the start of the pandemic, how many of your customers have actually changed the training so that they've done, increased training, or they've evolved their training, and they are specifically focusing on working from home, talking to their employees about having to change what they're doing? Now, that could be just some general advice about logging in. It could be more in-depth cybersecurity and phishing training, or it could even be talking to them about how secure is their home network. Because effectively, if you have people working from home, even on a company laptop, but especially on a personal device, on their home Wi-Fi, that home Wi-Fi is to an extent an extension of the corporate network now. And whatever devices they've got on there, that, obviously we could all have Google Homes and Amazon Alexas and smart TVs, and some of you may even have smart fridges or Bluetooth kettles or any of these different things. But there could be lots of other IoT devices. So they could be kind of thermostats, they could be CCTV, they could be doorbells, they could be child monitors. It could be anything. So got some of those answers coming in. So that's interesting. Kind of a third of you said most of them, and that's really, really positive. A couple of respondents said none, but then most people said some of them. So I think that really identifies that a lot of your customers out there have probably not necessarily really evolved their training for their staff. And obviously things have fundamentally changed. As I said, if our home network is now part of the corporate network, then there's a real change that that absolutely has to happen for many people. So if we look at those organizations as well, look at your customers, and we mentioned talking about kind of what their priorities are and what the market drivers are about this. All of your customers are also going to be in different places. So this conversation to be able to have with them, understanding what the threats are that are specific to them, that might not be broad across their entire market. It doesn't necessarily relate to their organization size. It depends on what the conversations they're having with their employees. Every one of your customers is going to be in a different place. So some of them are going to be a lot earlier in this journey of digital transformation, in terms of just deploying basic cloud applications, and some of them are going to be much further ahead. But everybody's going to be in a different place, and you can't just judge them necessarily by their vertical. So here's a great example. It's a cybersecurity and technical presentation. So obviously we've got a picture of a sand dredger, for those of you wondering what that is. So again, a little bit of insight here. There's broadly two types of sand out there. I might not expected to discuss this. So there's round sand and square sand. Round sand is brilliant for those of you who want to kind of spend time on the beach. It's soft, it's smooth, it moves around. It's much nicer, but it's really bad to build on. So if you're talking about land reclamation out there, building out ports or space, and countries or organizations wanting to build out and push the sea back effectively and build out the land, round sand is no good. Square sand, not great if you're in the Bahamas, but really good if you're want to be able to build on. So when we talk about a company that might provide sand dredging services, you might think, well, that's not a data company. They may not be a cybersecurity priority conversation for me. They have big industrial boats that move bits of, kind of large volumes of sand from one place to another. But essentially, the boat is just a part of what they do. It's a utility, and that's an easy replicatable part of their business. What they really have is they have data, they have insight and intelligence, and they potentially have decades of knowledge of what the beds are, what the seabeds are, what the land is like under the water across the world. They're going to be the experts in knowing where to dig and where not to dig, They're going to have the equipment to have done all of this research. They're going to have all that experience across years of understanding where is good, where is not good, and what the tactics are. And a lot of that information is essentially going to be highly confidential IP. So in many ways, actually, if you take the example of a sand dredging company, that insight that an IP that they have is hugely valuable and important, because ultimately the bit that is the sand dredging boat is probably the easiest to be able to replicate. And that's why they potentially could be at risk from a data breach of that IP coming out, would be, losing a huge part of the value of their business. If we then take an example of air conditioning, so it's all obviously calamity day after sand dredging, but we talk about supply chain attacks. If we talk about air conditioning systems, a lot of these obviously nowadays are internet connected. And one of the most famous breaches of recent times was Target. For those of you who don't know, Target's a massive retailer in America, kind of Tesco Express, but on kind of steroids. They sell absolutely everything. They suffered a very, very bad credit card data breach. They got fines. Senior executives lost their jobs. They had to pay a huge amount of money out. They had lawsuits. Their share price took a dive. So it was a massive impact on the organization. How did they lose their credit card data? Well, basically, it wasn't even a deliberate attack. There were some chances, some bad actors that managed to compromise an air conditioning company. While they're on their network, they realized that actually that air conditioning company, because they didn't want to send out vans and to every single kind of customer that they had, they connected and monitored those air conditioning units over the internet. So they had remote connections out to those units. They managed to hop on to some of those units that were kind of connected out from that corporate network. Unfortunately, some of those units, as an example, were in a Target store. And rather than being on their own network, they were actually on the same computer network as the main Target IT systems in that store. So they were actually able to hop again from the air conditioning units over onto the Target store. And I think you can obviously see what's coming. The credit card information, the credit card system, and the data was on the same network as well. So that wasn't segmented or firewalled in any way whatsoever. It was all connected on the same network, and bad actors were able to hop from the Target network onto the credit card machines as well, compromise that data, and then obviously it was a massive data breach. So great example of those kind of supply chain attacks. And obviously the ultimate kind of supply chain attack from our perspective in terms of the industry is obviously MSPs and IT companies beginning to get hit. Obviously, Kaseya was a recent one that really kind of badly hit MSPs. And obviously there have been kind of, definitely high profile other examples as well. And the other big challenge that we have from a cybersecurity perspective is that balance versus productivity. It doesn't necessarily always always go kind of one side or another. There is a balance to be found in the middle. Security obviously protects us, but many users obviously see security as being a prohibitor, as stopping them being able to do their job, which is why many people turn to shadow IT. So when we talk about shadow IT, we mean employees using non-sanctioned or non-approved applications. So that could be cloud storage, perfect example of people running out of storage kind of locally. So okay, they'll pop it on Google Drive or Dropbox or what have you. Those applications might not be authorized by the IT team, but people want to get on and they want to be able to do their job. And sometimes that's from a good perspective, and it can empower people. Absolutely. But it's understanding and talking to your customers in terms of making sure that that's enabled and empowered in as positive a way possible. But those restrictions, kind of don't stop people doing their job. Ultimately, when security kind of stops being effective, when it stops people being able to be productive, and then all that happens then is people find ways around it. And then that will often cause a bigger issue, than could have happened, kind of potentially in the first place. And then when we talk about kind of, examples of kind of, real world, real world impact, and those, it's incredibly easy for organizations to get compromised, and to find things out there. We talk about things like joking about the air conditioning systems, or obviously kind of smart fridges. out there. I don't have a poll for how many people have Bluetooth kettles or smart fridges, but please feel free to put it in the chat if anybody does have one of those. I'm intrigued. I want to meet someone who does have an internet-enabled fridge at some point, because Samsung have been banging on and promoting them for years. But they must be selling them somewhere to somebody. So, but this is an example of a search engine. So we talk about Shodan. So it's a search engine, not just for refrigerators. That bit of text changes. That's the bit I caught it on. But it's a search engine to find out there for internet connected devices. And obviously, this can be used in a really legitimate and safe way, but it can also be used by bad actors as well. So finding out there any IP connected devices, and that could be CCTV cameras, it could be air conditioning units, it could be heating systems, it could be traffic lights. And if the default username and password is not changed, and the permissions are not changed, and it automatically connects an open port out to the internet, then bad actors could compromise those devices quickly and easily. So there's a real challenge out there for the sheer number of IoT devices that are coming on everyone's network. People are talking about things like kind of smart warehouses and sensors, a huge number of internet connected devices that are now on the corporate network, just like all those home devices you might have in terms of smart speakers and smart doorbells, and now on that corporate network, because if they're connected to your network, your customers, their laptops are on that network, and their VPN back onto the network. And the VPN gives full exposure back onto the network. So all these devices now are the new perimeter of the network. And that's where that kind of potential risk now is. One of the things I just wanted to kind of touch on as well, that we talked about earlier on, was business email compromise. So, we've talked about kind of some of the other kind of risk to business around, especially kind of their role in the supply chain and different sort of attacks. We also talked about kind of phishing attacks. And this is another prime example of where it's not just technology, it's about us as individuals and human beings, and social engineering. So this is a kind of, smarter, more evolved version of basic phishing or smishing text, where you get those emails or messages saying you've got the tax refund, or you need to take a COVID test. So business email compromise is this more advanced version of phishing, a bit like spear phishing or whaling, where basically bad actors try to compromise an organization by sending emails either purporting to be from them, or if they've taken over the network, actually from internal emails, and asking an organization to do something. Often that involves actually just sending a large payment out. There's a few different variations of it. So it can be an impersonation of a CEO, for example, sending an email in, using their name, possibly buying a domain with one letter changed, so it looks legitimate. They can copy and paste an email signature, or a logo, or kind of all their details at the bottom, so it looks legit. Sometimes it can be compromised, so they can actually have malware sitting on the system. So they actually do send a physical email. They do send a real email from someone's account because they've compromised it, but obviously it's them controlling it. Or sometimes it can be from a third party, so purporting to be from a supplier, for example. And what they do is they ask for payments, and it's incredibly sophisticated, a high degree of social engineering. So on the CEO, it might be sending an email to a very junior person in the finance team saying, I've set up a new supplier, it's a confidential, we're going to be buying another company, we're going to be launching a new product, we've got this supplier, I need you to pay them some money. And on the face of it, many of us may look at that and go, well, that seems unlikely, who would fall for that? But the way that the world has changed, and they prey on a lot of social conditions, they target junior people on this, kind of with the names of senior people. They look at organizations or cultures even where there's less questioning of authority. They could look at distributed workforces where people aren't in the office anymore. And that's the thing. If you get that email and you're not sure and you're under pressure and it's quite aggressive. Maybe you started only just new at a company. You don't have a colleague to just lean over and go, this looks a bit dodgy, should I do this? They prey on those things. They look at when CEOs may be away on business trips, so they can't be contacted. So they say, oh, you've got to just do this, and then they can't be contacted to validate that request. Huge amounts of social engineering and clever tactics are used on this. And organizations do fall. I mean, the largest examples up from kind of small hundreds or thousands of pounds, or all the way up to Google got compromised for over $100 million. And we've had an aircraft manufacturer in Australia got done for over $60 million, tens of millions of pounds, as well as smaller scale ones have been lost through this. So it's a massive issue. The suppliers window, again, it's a very clever one. Finding out about what suppliers may work with an organization, sending in an invoice. They know that they get invoiced, sending in a letter saying we've changed our bank account details. It's relatively easy, sadly, to be able to mock up a letterhead or an email saying that they've changed their bank account details. Payments get made, and obviously it doesn't get tracked or potentially recognized until it's too late. And those emails can be very sophisticated, or they can be straightforward. So, here's an example of one. It's quite direct. It's pushing from a timescale perspective. It's much more kind of personal. So, there's lots and lots of different tactics that get used. It's often emotive language. It's often leveraging somebody's possibly more junior position within an organization. So, it's a real big threat, and they target those senior executives, and they use common email subjects, and it's a real challenge for organizations out there. And a lot of these, because they don't contain malware or links to malicious websites, they don't always necessarily get stopped by email security. So this is a prime example of where organizations, and we talked about earlier on of many of your customers possibly not having done that training, about making sure that they have the right training, the right education in place. And frankly, again, this is where you can help advise your customers. It's got nothing to do with selling them technology. It's about being a trusted advisor, of making sure they have an open and a transparent cybersecurity culture. People need to be able to ask silly questions. People need to be able to go, I've got this email, it's a bit dodgy, I'm not sure, without fear of looking stupid, because they don't have that person they can necessarily lean to over to the right to go, this looks a bit weird, should I do something about this? They need to be able to talk to their colleagues about it. Quick one to just touch on compliance and frameworks, because this is another way that you can have those conversations with your customers that aren't just when's your antivirus renewal necessarily. I touched on the National Cybersecurity Centre. Again, I'll send links to this. They could probably they don't do a lot of work, I find, with the channel or the trade. I think there's an opportunity there for them, definitely, but they do work with obviously large organisations, government departments in the UK when they get breached, and they've got a lot of fantastic resources out there. This is an example of 10 steps that you can use as a framework talking to your customers about things. And some of them are, okay, they're technical, so talking about what technology they have for network security or malware or managing user privileges, but also what do they have around risk management? What do they have around disaster response and incident management? Do they have a process in place in the event of a data breach? What do they do? Who's responsible for all of that? And what steps are they going to take? So that's really, really important that you can talk to your customers about giving them some really useful advice there. That's just, again, all about strengthening your relationship with them. And that could be, looking at a basic framework like Cyber Essentials. I mean, that's aimed primarily at smaller organizations. It's a really simple, straightforward scheme. Many of you might already be involved in helping your customers with that, but it's just a simple exercise that they can go through, covering the 5 key areas to make sure that they've got the most essential cybersecurity processes in place. And obviously, we have GDPR, in there, that wasn't a one-hit wonder. That needs to constantly be evaluated, and reviewed. So if we look at where, kind of all of this now kind of converges and comes into place, there's so many challenges for organizations coming from so many different areas, more users, more devices, and more threats. And the challenges of anywhere access that people have nowadays, and shallow IT. And therefore, when you look at your customers and you're mapping against them and understanding where they may be, and then beginning to align some of those security technologies kind of to where they are, because as mentioned, all your customers are going to be in very different places. So it's understanding where they are on their own journey to make sure you're having the right conversation with them. And also it's about having the right conversation with different people as well. So we've talked a lot about, organizations out there and how they're different, and making sure that we're talking to them in the right way, that's relevant to them. But also there's going to be different people within your customers as well that have different priorities. So at the most senior level, CIO, CISO, a kind of VP of IT, they're all going to be about IT as a competitive advantage and driving innovation and having their IT service team move that business forward. But then if you have the CISO or the risk officer, a little bit more cautious there, they're going to be looking more instant response. They're going to be IT from a strategic perspective, but definitely security from a strategic perspective as well, and around business continuity. But then when we move on to compliance, that's more about those controls. So taking that step further a little bit more, there's understanding where they are in terms of regulations, and not just GDPR, but that could be HIPAA if they relate to the US healthcare. It could be an ISO standard. Obviously, it could be credit card, PCI DSS, if they take credit card information. So there's a whole nother level of compliance organizations need to meet. And again, then legal counsel and officer, and that's even more so about having in the event of a data breach, and definitely looking at when, not if, they get breached. Do they have the systems in place to be able to do the discovery, to find out what went wrong, and how to respond to that, effectively. And then on the flip side of that, you've got the sysadmin guys, the people who keep the lights on and everything working. They're just all about minimal downtime. They're probably about having not crazy hours, and just making sure stuff is working. And therefore, cybersecurity is absolutely really important. But it's about making sure that it's a business enabler around productivity, to be able to keep people working, because otherwise they're the ones that get the criticism and the negativity back from the team if people are stopped to do the work that they want to be able to do. And then the IT manager might be the overall architect of the strategy, or certainly the implementer of it, and have overall responsibility. And that's all about productivity, making sure that the organization's up and running. So you've got a lot of people there coming at it from very, very different perspectives. And they're going to have different motivations and different priorities in terms of their own kind of digital strategy. And all of that needs to kind of, be taken into account, when they're looking at cybersecurity technology. So there's a lot of different conversations that need to be had out there. And I think one thing that we've definitely seen over the last few years is an evolution of the new IT buyer. So all of those people traditionally fit in a kind of either an administrative or certainly an IT team perspective. But now we've got people coming from line of business. So ultimately where this is coming from is, that kind of, increased focus on digital transformation and the competitive advantage that IT systems can have, kind of without a doubt, whether that's kind of, web applications, or whether it's smart warehouses, or whether it's, kind of more productive remote workforce. It's coming from different areas of business. It could be from marketing, deploying more cloud applications and fancy systems to be able to deliver better demand generation activities. And they're going to be driving that technical information. And it's going to be coming from all parts of the business. They're definitely going to still work with IT. That's absolutely going to be a part of it. But it's only going to be one, part of that conversation. They're going to be driving a lot of that innovation themselves. And if marketing are looking at new cloud applications or deploying in AWS, are they going to be talking to the resellers like yourselves? Are they going to be talking to the channel? They probably don't know about them. They just know, I can now deploy on AWS, or I can use Marketo and that's a cloud app. I don't need IT to be able to do that. And I certainly don't know who IT talk to in terms of their suppliers. So this shows that the level and the depth of conversation that we need to now have within our customers is definitely evolving, and changing very significantly. And those business units may even be able to get their own tech guys in terms of whether it's, from a marketing perspective, it might be data scientists, or maybe business analysts if it's coming from a finance perspective. They could be coming from all lots of different angles, and ultimately, therefore, those IT buyers could be absolutely anyone. And kind of it's expected that from both IDC and Gartner believe that a lot of the IT spending and decision making will be roughly split between IT teams, the IT department within organization, and business units. And that's that's where the money's coming from. So IT budgets, I think we all know are not finite, but if it's coming from driving business change and innovation, then that investment in IT could well be coming from those line of business, those departments. And that could obviously include cybersecurity as well, because if you're deploying new technology, whether it's IoT, whether it's cloud applications, whatever it happens to be, there's absolutely going to be a cybersecurity implication on it, as we've seen from everything else that we've covered so far this morning. And they're doing it because it's easy. It's easy to be able to do it. Cloud computing makes it much easier to be able to self-provision, and there's a real strategic advantage of being able to decentralize a lot of this decision making, so an organization can move much quicker, than it's ever moved before. So, and if we have a look at some of those kind of conversations, there is also, that balance when we looked at before of where organizations have of moving very, very quickly, but having that priority of where they are in their journey. Some organizations are going to be a lot more mature than others. This is an E92 concept that we've come up with. So obviously it looks a little bit complicated initially, but basically this is a really useful tool that we've had fantastic feedback from a lot of our partners on. And it's twofold. It's looking at cybersecurity maturity of both your organization as a reseller, and then also your customers as well. So for example, if you're basically take it from a couple of different angles. First of all, we've broken it down into 5 kind of core areas of IT around applications, endpoint, gateway, cloud, and network. And then basically we've broken it down into kind of 3 core rings. Cyber fundamentals are those technologies that we would frankly expect most organizations to have deployed out there. Best practice is what they should be either deploying now or have deployed or will be within the next 12 months to be able to address kind of today's kind of most advanced threats. And next gen are those technologies that are now emerging. They're appearing around the start of the Gartner hype cycle. Organizations are now beginning to look at these as part of their cybersecurity strategy. And basically, if you take it, first of all, look at it from your own perspective, from a reseller. So we wouldn't expect all of our partners to be selling all of this technology, but what's in your portfolio? What conversations can you have with your customers? At a cyber fundamentals, if you're not having those conversations with your customers, then potentially they're talking to somebody else. They should have these in here, so you should be talking to your customers. If they've been rolling out a lot of new endpoints, or maybe that they're increasing their investment in cloud infrastructure, then you could be going, right, that's great. So you're rolling out more instances and workloads in AWS. Okay, let's have a conversation about your cloud cybersecurity strategy. All those cyber fundamentals, they should have them in place. It's a great conversation for you. But equally, do you have those in your portfolio? If you're focused more on network, or you're focused on applications and working with organizations around what apps they have. If you don't have those technologies in your portfolio, if you're not having those conversations with your customers, either they could be missing out if you're the primary supplier and trusted advisor, or potentially somebody else is having that conversation with them. Same with best practice. So when you're working with them, like what are their key priorities now? What are they looking at throughout 2022? People are going to start by looking at their budgets and their strategy for next year. Are these best practice technologies in their portfolio already, or are they looking at it? And if they're not, then they need to be. And again, you need to be looking, well, possibly you need some of those technologies within your own portfolio. And then next gen, for those organizations you have that they've got a bigger budget, they've got high level IP, they've got a more, they work in a more regulated environment, for example, and they might need to be looking at some of those next gen technologies. Are you having those conversations with, where are their priorities, where are their focus, making sure that you're having the conversations and providing them with the advice and guidance that they need to be able to move that conversation on, and for you to be able to provide all the help and support that they need. Again, this is on our website. We'll have a new interactive version coming very, very shortly. This is another example I'll send over. And ultimately, if you guys want to be able to use this, then please feel free. Ultimately, this is another example of a sort of service and guidance that we can help you with. If you want to learn more about any of the technologies on here, absolutely, that's what we're here to help with. So in terms of kind of, what you should be doing next, and the conversations that you should be having with your customers around these things, not just about technology, but the things we've talked about today. So can employees bring personal devices, I say, to work? That could just mean literally to their kitchen table, obviously. What would happen? We talked about disaster planning. So having that within their NCSE 10-step framework, do they have the business continuity plans in place? We talked about who the threats could be. If they have high value IP, what would happen if their competitor got a hold of all of their information? And then also having a transparent conversation in terms of where are their investments right now, having a look at what their priorities and their focus are, and making sure that we can help map that to what their priorities are as an organization. And then maybe looking at some of those frameworks, looking at incident response plan, looking at if they updated their acceptable use policy in terms of what people are allowed to do. And, they may need to update that process and have more training about what happens. Are they letting people, connect their home printers onto their laptops? Well, if they can't, then they may well be doing something else to get around that then involves emailing documents to their personal account, because they're not allowed to add their personal printer on their home network onto their laptop. Well, then they'll just forward the information out to their own email address so they can print it off then if they needed to print it off. Is that actually worse than letting them connect the printer? So actually really understanding what your customers' priorities are and what they need to be doing, is a really, really great first step. And then when we talk about those technologies in there and talk about how do you have these conversations, how can you go out to market? Obviously, we have a fantastic tech team, and yes, you've got to have an IT crowd GIF at the very least within any technology presentation. But the whole point ultimately is we are here to be able to help, whether it's building out marketing campaigns to enable you to go out to your customers and have some more of these conversations. It's leveraging our tech team to understand more of some of that technology portfolio, that I talked about as well, whether it's delivering more sales training around some of the solutions and vendor technologies that we have. Ultimately, we're here to be able to help, to be able to take hopefully what you've learned today, move that on to the next level and have more in-depth conversations ultimately with your customers and prospects. So obviously we try and wrap it up around an hour. So I've gone a couple of minutes over. Ultimately, I hope that was really, really useful for everybody. Ultimately, when we run it online, I try and stick to an hour. Normally when it's in person, I do go a little bit slower and a little bit more in depth. Apologies if I do talk a little bit quickly, but I hope it was really useful for everybody. Obviously, I really value your time. So thank you very much for joining today. Just having a look, I haven't got any questions today, but if you do have any, I will send an email around. There will be a follow-up. Feel free to get in touch with either myself or your account manager for any more information. Other than that, again, hope you found it useful. We'll send an email around with all the additional links and resources so you can hopefully find out a little bit more. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and then hopefully we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.
If you need to contact us for further information, you can reach us on the website that's going to be in the description. You can also contact us on our live chat service. You can contact us on the YouTube comments. We'd be more than happy to assist you. You can reach us at acs@cyberservices.com. And the contact numbers are +44 for international dial, and that would be 1704 893 447. You could also reach me on my mobile at 07494 027783. If you need to contact us on any further information about webinars or demos, please let us know, and I and one of the team would be very happy to assist you. Thank you. But please note that when you are coming to us with regard to an educational request, please also send in some form of identification, or if you are a member of staff, say the IT administrator, please send in a letter from the head teacher with a manual signature so that we can apply an educational discount. But please be aware that you may have to buy so many licenses in order to get a discount. Thank you and bye bye.